All right, good evening. All right, everyone, we are now recording. I am trusting that you can hear us now. I am Mary Spalding of Rudolf Steiner branch in Chicago, and we are delighted to host the Karl König exhibit and Richard Steele and Deborah Grace of the Karl König Institute. This is the fourth of 5 talks that Richard is giving tonight. And I'm going to have Deborah Grace, who is the director of the North American office, come and introduce Richard and his talk tonight. So thank you all for being here. Please turn off your cell phones if you are here, and welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for coming here tonight. Those of you who have come before and those of you who haven't, we're so happy to see you all. And we're so happy to see you all who have signed into this talk online. It's just delightful. And we're excited for the Karl König Institute in this inaugural event of the North American tour of the exhibitions of Karl König's drawings for the Calendar of the Soul. It's been a wonderful beginning so far here in Chicago. So Richard's lecture tonight is The Path of Feeling Self-Knowledge in relation to the Goetheanum, the Foundation Stone, and the Anthroposophical Society. So this is a centenary talk in relation to the Calendar of the Soul. And these themes are really active right now within many groups of the society. So we're thrilled that Richard can bring his insights and Rudolf Steiner's wisdom of the Calendar of the Soul and Karl König's drawings that illuminated it to all of us here tonight. So thank you again, and thank you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's of course important that things go wrong in the beginning of our lecture, isn't it? You know, it's a little test. You know, are we all going to say, no, we don't like this, we'll go home instead, or are we going to hold on and we'll get things fixed? So it looks like we've got things fixed. That's great. And I would actually just like to say in the beginning that, of course, I can't give all those 5 lectures this evening. I can't even think of the whole row. So the idea is to give a bit of an overview of these connections between the Calendar of the Soul and what happened around the Christmas Foundation Stone, the Christmas conference and the Foundation Stone. And we'll see where it leads us in the end. But I do think it is an important question. And I think it's also an important question, I brought this question up already, that we consider what Rudolf Steiner didn't say and didn't do. Because we do know a few things that he didn't say and didn't do. Whereas, of course, we know over 6,000 lectures and all books, and we know his journeys and all this. The outer things we know about, but there are some things we know he didn't or couldn't say or do. And I would like to bring a little bit of that into the talk today, because it belongs, I think, to this whole question of the founding of the Anthroposophical Society. It came out, of course, of all the problems that were there. The question, how does he fit this in to the culture of his time? And the time wasn't ready. So, of course, there were a lot of impulses that didn't actually link on in a way that people could carry them. Also, the Calendar of the Soul, as we've seen, it was not easy to understand what Rudolf Steiner was giving at the time. And so this impulse that was to be published every year anew, it was to be a new calendar, not just once, but every year. And that just didn't happen. So this is in itself already one of those points, something that seemed very close to Rudolf Steiner's mission, his yeah, his task for our time, and yet it couldn't be taken up in the way he had hoped. Now, two things I would just like to mention that he didn't say and didn't do. That is right at the beginning when he took on the German section of the Theosophical Society. So that was a vessel which could possibly have been the vessel that he needed to bring anthroposophy to the world. And of course, that was from the beginning not easy. And on this 22nd of October 1902, when he was inaugurated as secretary of the German section, he was given the task of giving a lecture, and his theme was practical karma exercises. I think that's quite something, you know. But the dear Theosophical Society members didn't really want to hear that, so he also didn't give that lecture. And only in 1923, I think that's also interesting, did he reflect on that and say, yes, I wanted to speak about that in 1902, but it couldn't come in that situation. So he left the meeting early and went to the Workers' Association and talked to them because they were open for everything he brought. So that was, I think, an interesting, and of course, towards the end of his life, he gave these wonderful lectures for the workers at the Goetheanum. And I think that is something very, special about Rudolf Steiner, that he actually was interested in people who wanted to be part of social life and not to extract themselves from social life, which was, I think, the case for many of the people in the Theosophical Society. So anthroposophy was for social life, and that's why as soon as he was inaugurated as secretary, he began writing essays about theosophy and the social question. Now you probably know that as a little booklet today. It's usually called Anthroposophy and the Social Question, 3 essays. It was meant to be at least 5 essays, but they were not written. Why? Because there was no interest. And also that he spoke about in 1923, the essays that I could not finish. So not because he didn't have time, that's sometimes one says, well, he had so many things going, he couldn't write it. But that's, I think, if you study the life of Rudolf Steiner, nonsense. Of course he didn't have time, and yet he would have written the essays if somebody had read them, but they weren't read. And there we have these wonderful descriptions, quite clear and quite practical ideas of how social life could or should evolve. Now, I can't really go through all 3 lectures that we've already had. Sorry for those who are here for the first time this evening, but we are only have 2.5 hours this evening, right? Look at these things. So I would skip over a few things, but I would nevertheless like to mention the impulse out of which the calendar of the soul was given. Because we have to remember 1909, when Rudolf Steiner was particularly focused towards Munich and the building, the St. John's building that should have been in the center of Munich, and not the Goetheanum, but a St. John's building. And in this time, of course, there were many, many events around art, how art could maybe work into society in a new way. And of course, we know the mystery plays came then, eurythmy, and all these impulses out of art. Now, at the same time, 1909, I mentioned the model building in Malsch, right next to Karlsruhe, this little, as Rudolf Steiner said, Rosicrucian temple that was built there. And I think one has a little bit overlooked the significance of that building. It's too small. So, but if you go there, it is an amazing experience. And one can really feel that it is a very special temple, even though it's not the huge size that you can go in, but it's very small. And out of this, we see Rudolf Steiner beginning these journeys, 1910 particularly, across Europe to prepare people, I think one could say, for a new sense for the being of Christ, the appearance of Christ in the etheric. That was this whole year 1910 and into 1911. And how strongly this was connected to the biography of Rudolf Steiner, I think we can sense because he was on his way at Christmas 1910. He actually had planned to go and visit his father, particularly his father because he was ill and actually he didn't live very long. So this was the last chance for Rudolf Steiner to visit him. And he was going to be there over Christmas 1909, 1910. And strangely, he bought a train ticket, or it was bought for him, but he didn't travel. Instead, he went to Stockholm and began the lectures about the etheric Christ. One can wonder, why didn't he visit his father? As he probably knew, it was the last chance to do so. Not because he was not close to it, but we do know the train on which he was booked had an accident. It was derailed. And this was the worst train accident up to that time in Austria. I can ask, of course, in the Karma lectures, Rudolf Steiner describes situations like this, Just imagine a time when you think, no, I do not want to go down this street. And what happens? A slate falls from the roof that would have hit you. Well, that's a small example, but how could that have been for Rudolf Steiner? Did he realize he was not supposed to take this train? It was a near-death experience, so to speak, for Rudolf Steiner. I think that's significant, that this belongs to the beginning of his journeys to speak about the etheric Christ. So if we have troubles with our computer this evening, I think that's a very, very small event. But for Rudolf Steiner, who's going to give all these talks, it is a big threat to his life. There were a number of threats in that way. I'll come back to speak about that later. But then we see this strong necessity for his time, that people are made aware of what is going to be perceptible for the human being in near future, and to ask them to prepare. So we looked then, the last lectures, a little bit at the question, was not the calendar of the soul the preparation for this event? As, so to speak, an inner path, a possibility of inner development to heighten one's possibilities to perceive what was happening in the etheric world. We can leave it as a question. We don't know maybe, but I do think there is a strong connection there. And we do see that directly out of these journeys, Rudolf Steiner goes back to Berlin and gives the lectures about the St. Mark's Gospel, and there he mentions that we would need a new calendar. I read that in my first talk. And one person at least heard that, so probably Rudolf Steiner said some things were only audible for one person. And nevertheless, it was incredibly important, because Emma von Eckartstein was at these lectures, and just 3 months later, she was with him in Italy and put the question, do we not need a calendar for our members? And he must have been incredibly pleased that this question came so concretely that he said, yes, you prepare the drawings of the zodiac signs and I will prepare something and we will put this together when we meet again here in Berlin. And that was then March, they spoke about this, and it was the next Christmas. It was 1911, 1912, when they came together again in Berlin. And if you imagine this, this time of Christmas, 1911, 1912, it was quite special because within the Theosophical Society, there was something developing which was very difficult for Rudolf Steiner, because they were preparing Krishnamurti to be the new appearance of Christ. You see, this is parallel, absolutely parallel. And exactly in December 1911, Krishnamurti was taken to London to prepare him for his task. So what happened there, for instance, in Berlin, the talk about the cult of the soul, that was exactly in this time when Krishnamurti was being prepared to take on this task for the Theosophical Society at least, but certainly it was thought that it would be a much wider event. And during this time of December, on the 15th of December, Rudolf Steiner said that there would be a founding of an association for Theosophical, it was still the Theosophical Society, Theosophical Life and Art. Now, maybe some of you know a different translation, so I'll explain why I say it like this. It is called the Gesellschaft für Theosophische Art und Kunst. And some people seem to think there's two words meaning art. But art in German actually means more a way of life, a way of being, and not art. So he's really saying maybe way of life or style of life and art. And that I think was important to see that what he was envisioning was something which would be a social impulse. And so this association he was going to found, it's also called a Stiftung in German. That's not quite correct. Rudolf Steiner did say Gesellschaft, an association, an earthly body, so to speak. But he also said, if this would take place, then out of the spiritual world, there would be an endowment. That is the way he uses the word Stiftung. So I think one has to be quite exact with the translation in this case, that he is founding something on earth to receive an endowment from the spirit. And a little bit later, he's quite clear that the individuality which would endow something into this society or association is actually Christian Rosenkreuz himself. I think that's also significant. But as we know, it didn't happen. He said, yes, until the 6th of January, a number of you will be named to take part in this. He had named a few people to take on specific tasks within this association or society. But that was only a little kernel, and he was going to name others, and nobody was named. So I think people are a little bit on edge, what is happening or what is not happening. And on the 6th of January, well, the Holy Nights are coming to an end, and he was asked, we've not heard anything about the foundation of this society. And Rudolf Steiner said, well, that is an answer in itself. Evidently, he noticed that people were not ready for this impulse, and it didn't take place. There was one meeting of those who had already been named, this small group, where Imre von Eckartstein was also present. And in this group, they decided that the one impulse to come out of this meeting would be the calendar of the soul. Nothing else. It was the only meeting. And then I think nobody spoke about it anymore, as far as I know, for a long time. After the death of Rudolf Steiner, it came up again, but I think at that time, it was more or less forgotten. He was approached by a number of people around the 6th of January, but then not anymore. So we see out of this, very soon, of course, at Easter, the Calendar of the Soul was published, also with the drawings of the zodiac signs, and this path was given. And so I think it is quite clear that this was a path of practice that Rudolf Steiner was trying to give people to allow a new connection to this being of time, which is, in effect, the etheric world. It was not taken up. So it's, I think, I'm very interested to see that exactly at this time, 1912, so this is Christmas 1911, 1912, 1912 is then the foundation of the Anthroposophical Society in December of 1912. So all this takes place within this very short time that the split with the Theosophical Society is quite clear. And the Anthroposophical Society is founded there in 1912. And almost directly, then the foundation stone is laid for the Goetheanum. 1913, of course, September 20th of September. So, Michaelmas. It's interesting that we have this St. John's impulse in Munich, and suddenly it is a Michaelmas impulse in Dornach. This change from Munich to Basel. Whatever is behind that, and I don't want to go into that too much at the moment, but I think it is important to see this changeover, the St. John's building in Munich, and then the name Goetheanum comes. Has that not got to do with the question of metamorphosis? That was, of course, to be experienced, not to be spoken about only, but to be experienced in the first Goetheanum. To go into this building, one is surrounded by metamorphosis, through the windows, through the wood carving, through the columns. Everything brings one to an experience of metamorphosis, the same as with the calendar of the soul, we are led into our own metamorphosis. And that, of course, was the hope for the Goetheanum, that those who entered this building would be changed by the building. It was not just a work of art to be looked at, but it was a changing experience for people, and those who experienced it have also spoken about this, that one could not leave the building the same as one went in. Now, of course, it is very soon after that, I think if we realize 1912, 1913, the Calendar of the Soul and the Anthroposophical Society, the foundation stone for the Goetheanum, and just 10 years later, then the fire. This short period, and of course, these 100 years since the fire of the Goetheanum, and now we're coming towards 100 years of the foundation stone. It's very important that we remember these events. And many people will be speaking about it, working at the themes, also artistically. I think that is extremely important to realize that is a period of just 10 years, basically, from these events which I speak about. So the fire at the Goetheanum is, of course, embedded, historically speaking. It's not something that comes out of nothing, but it is also embedded into the historical development of these times in some way. In which way is a question, of course, but I do have a strong feeling that the foundation stone, the Christmas conference, was an event which should have been later. I think but this is only a personal impression that I've gained with time, that in actual fact, Rudolf Steiner was living towards this event for the year 1933. That would have been the year in which he would have been 72. And he did speak about that age and say, well, that is a time when we approach 72 years of age, we are freed from karma. That, of course, was this huge question with the foundation stone and the Christmas meeting, that Rudolf Steiner was not free to do what he wanted, so to speak. He was not free just to found this society the way he refounded it. So we know from what he tells us that he had to ask the spirit world if it were possible to fulfill this event. Because he had to bring this forwards. He, of course, knew he didn't have the possibility to live until 1933, where he'd already told people this was going to be the year when the etheric Christ would really appear for humankind. Would that not have been, I just put this as a question, don't say, don't quote me, he said that. It was, no, it's a question for me. It seems to come out of the matter itself, this question, would that not have been the right time to bring this event of the Christmas Foundation in 1933, when in actual fact, what did happen was that the demons of the sun were released, the Antichrist was released, and not the connection to the etheric Christ that should have been prepared. So we know from Peter Wegmann that Rudolf Steiner told him something about this personal problem also. If he was able to found the Anthroposophical Society, now of course, to be the center of an earthly association, and at the same time to be the esoteric teacher. This was not the case in 1902. In this case, and also in 1913, it was 1912, sorry, it was quite clear in 1912 that he was the esoteric teacher. He was not a member of the Anthroposophical Society. I'm sure you know that. He could only take this upon him because Marie Steiner was there to see to the association, to the earthly necessities of this body, of this legal body. And Rudolf Steiner was the esoteric teacher. This was not to be the case with the Christmas Foundation meeting. Rudolf Steiner was to take on both. He was to be the center of both. Bring it together, actually, that it was not two, but to bring it together. So this is something he spoke to Ita Wegmann about. And you see the different connection between him and Marie Steiner on the one hand, and Ita Wegmann on the other hand, who came much more into the foreground then for the Christmas Foundation. He said to Ita Wegmann, in earlier times, someone who had enacted such an esoteric deed would perhaps have had to pay for it with a sudden death. With the forces of Christ, such things are now possible. And because humanity in its present state needs it, one must have courage to do things of such a magnitude. So it seems that he received the answer from the spirit world because this is in the service of the Christ being, then it is possible because necessary for his time. And we know, of course, at the end of the Christmas Foundation, meeting is where he became critically ill, suddenly critically ill, where this word has been passed on, he was poisoned. Whether that is the case or not is, of course, still a question. Some think he was poisoned. I think, in actual fact, the way he spoke about it, he was poisoned by having to eat earthly food. That was the poison. And because he was not able, out of the situation, out of his own earthly situation, he was no longer able to eat. And so the little bit he ate on the 1st of January 1924 was a poison. And we do know he was very close to death. So again, this near-death experience at Christmas time. It's, I think, quite dramatic to see that. This is we can see how serious the situation is. It is 14 years after 1910, 14 years, 2 7-year periods after he'd taken these journeys to prepare people for the coming of the etheric Christ being. And now he has created this vessel with the Anthroposophical Society, with the foundation stone. And there, again, this near-death experience, twice 7 years. And again, we know this through Ita Legman. Rudolf Steiner says something that the foundation stone was something that came directly from the spirit. It is not finished, but needs to be continued. And that's also an important fact about the foundation stone. That is why the meditation that is actually the foundation stone. Of course, there was a foundation stone laid physically, but actually the foundation stone was the meditation, which can be laid into the hearts of those who wish to continue this impulse. You see how close this comes to the question we had with Caspar Hauser. Is the thread still possible between the human being and the spirit world? And here from Rudolf Steiner, it was Caspar Hauser who lived and died the way he did, that this thread could be upheld. And now, through the foundation stone, something is put into humanity because there is still a possibility to connect to the spirit. And I read these words that Rudolf Steiner said on the 1st of January. I allow myself to ask something of you all. This was for the last meeting on the 1st of January. I allow myself to ask something of you all, to allow the right mood to be in this meeting. Now that's my translation, mood. It's very difficult to translate the German Stimmung. So what would be the right word for that? And look in a dictionary, you'll find this mood is the first thing that you can say. You can also say atmosphere. It's an inner, a spiritual climate, so to speak, that is to be created. And you can also translate it as spirit, the spirit that lives in that room. So he's asking the people at this meeting to create something, an atmosphere, a climate in that room that makes possible that this connection takes place. One can also say a feel. It's also a translation for Stimmung. Feel for something. And so, and he says, Stimmung, Stimmung, Stimmung. Strange that he repeats that 3 times. But I think he needed to make clear how important this is. It's not just, be nice to each other or something like that. But it is important how we create an atmosphere when we come together. then particularly, of course, but I think always, the connection of one human being to the other, that takes place in a certain mood, with a certain Stimmung, a certain spirit lives between human beings, so that indeed the spirit can enliven this connection between human beings. Well, this continuation belongs then, I think, very much in the social level. A continuation of the foundation stone laying is, yes, of course, the path of the individual. Yes, of course, spiritual research. But I think also, just as Rudolf Steiner said in 1911, it is life, the style of life, the way of life and art. So it is how we conduct ourselves. It is what mood, what Stimmung, what atmosphere lives between human beings. That is of greatest importance. Again, we see the count of the soul as a path of preparation for exactly this, a feeling self-recognition, a path of feeling knowledge, or to put it in other terms, I think we can say heart knowledge. It is a path of the heart. And so exactly what Rudolf Steiner asks of the people who came together for the Christmas Foundation meeting, exactly this is the path we take with the calendar of the soul. And tomorrow will be the question also how that belongs together, the atmosphere, the climate, the social climate, and of course the climate of our world. I do think that is of significance, but that's the theme tomorrow. Karl König took this very seriously. He pledged to take this seed of the foundation stone to wherever he went. He was not sure where he was going to be in the end, but to take this seed from Central Europe and plant it somewhere that it may grow and be taken back to Central Europe. That was his, not just idea, that was his ideal. So his, I think one can say his foremost task, he felt to be creating social forms which would, in fact, now if I say replace, that sounds a bit strange, but in a way to replace the outer structures of the Goetheanum, to rebuild these forms, these etheric forms, these metamorphosing forms of the Goetheanum in a social setting. That was what Karl König wanted deeply with his heart, that not a building would be built somewhere, but that a social building would come about, where within social life, this Stimmung, this feeling, this mood, this atmosphere could be practiced. And where better than with such diverse people that he had in Camphill schools in Scotland. Very diverse. All the forms of humanity one can imagine, so to speak, together in the schools in Curative Education. Goethe would have been very pleased, of course, to see what is possible with the human form. What expressions of humanity can we find in all the, what we call handicaps? So, in the same way that one could experience going into the first Goetheanum is moral growth also. I think that is one of the most important things Rudolf Steiner pointed to, that it would have an effect on the morality of the human being. So that doesn't mean you only come out with different thoughts or different feelings, but in actual fact one's deeds would change. It affects the morality of the human being. And so that was the task that Karl König set himself for the community in Scotland. And of course, that was a high ideal. In wartime, of course, as well, to create social forms in which morality could grow. That's, I think, quite special, seen on the backdrop of what was happening politically at exactly that time. Also in the Anthroposophical society, of course. So he was quite clear what challenges would be there for this task. But we do know that the very center of the Goetheanum building itself, but also the center of the foundation stone, is indeed this being of the Christ. It is the Goetheanum, a house of the word, but it is inasmuch the house of the being of the word. And if we remember the words, sorry, I can't speak this by heart in English, although my heart is in it, but I have to read it in English. The center of the foundation stone is human soul, you live within the beat of heart and lung, which through the rhythms of time, that is what we've spoken about with the soul coming, which through the rhythms of time leads you into your own soul being's feeling. Now, this is a different level of feeling, of course, than emotions, as we spoke about recently. It's not emotions that are meant, but it's this level of Stimmung, feeling. Yeah, we can also say, and we had that in conversation, I think, after the first lecture, it has to do with sensing, presencing. And then we have the next line, practice, spirit. Now it's very often translated as contemplating. I think to be true to the language of Rudolf Steiner, we would have to say practice, spirit, sensing. Geist, besinnen. Then the word sense is in the German. And I think we can do that in English just as well. Practice, spirit, sensing. Not thinking, not willing, but really sensing. It is the presence of the Christ being, which is here important. Imbalance of soul. Wolof School. We spoke about the first lectures. Balance of soul. That is what education is about. Not what exams you have, which college you go to, and so on, but balance of soul. Where the surging, world-evolving deeds unite one's own eye with the eye of the world. What or who is the eye of the world? Well, I shouldn't really want to interpret this, but I can do no other than to think this has surely to do with the Christ being itself. The word, the logos itself. Unite one's own eye with the eye of the world. That is the path of the current of the soul. Leave yourself in order to find yourself on a new level, to find yourself as spirit being. And we realize with the current of the soul, it is every year a little step towards realizing if I really find the true I, then I find the Christ being. Not I, but Christ in me. And that's what we find in all the verses. This is the path we go with the current of the soul. And we realize when we come towards the end, after this tremendous path of practice, towards Easter, we realize we are uniting with these powers of creation. Our thought is nothing else, if we really think, nothing else but at least akin to the forces of creation themselves. That is the transformation that thinking takes in the path of the kind of the soul. And we can equally follow the path of feeling and follow the path of the will through these 52 verses to realize that in the end they come together. My feeling will changes my thought, and therefore the I of the individual, one's own I, unites with the I of the world. And what comes then in the center, this very center of the foundation stone, and you will truly feel. It's not, oh, I feel quite well today. How are you? Thank you, I'm very well today. It's not so British. You will truly feel. That is something different. Feeling is an organ of recognition, an organ of perception for the spirit. It is not something which is trivial or has to do with emotions in any way. But what is meant with feeling here is the center of this path of the foundation stone, and equally the path of the kind of the soul. And so I think we can say that in the kind of the soul we have exactly these. Let me take you to St. John's. Remember St. John's building in Munich? That's the beginning, the founding impulse of the Goetheanum was there in Munich. And so in St. John's time, we hear the following. That is where we unite in a special way ourselves with spirit self in the peak of summer. St. John's is actually after the peak of summer, right? It's not summer solstice, it is 3 days later, St. John's Festival. It's important, I think, to realize we've passed through the zenith of the sun and passed into something which has to do with the spirit sun. And so also we already looked at the 12th of the St. John's verse, number 12, with Caspar Hauser in it. But the next picture that Karl König drew is for verse 13, and I'll read the verse first. And being now in senses heights, there we have the senses. Being now in senses heights, there flames into depths of soul, from worlds of spirit fire, the godly word of truth. That's really powerful, I think. It's quite an amazing verse. With prescience seek in spirit grounds, to find yourself in spirit kinship. Kinship with the spirit. Isn't that amazing? It's not yet united in the sense that we have here, but it's a kinship to the spirit. So would you like to bring the picture, Deborah? Thank you. Then we can see it exactly as poorly at the front as we can at the back. You can, of course, look at it a bit more exactly afterwards. What did Karl König draw for this fire that speaks to us, to the individual on his path of spirit kinship? Verse 13. Well, probably you can't see it so very well, but it's often a river. In this case, I don't think it's actually a river. It's much wider than a river, even wider than American rivers, you know. And there's this person dressed in sort of Greek gown, I think, and with both hands raised. And behind him, on the other side of the water, the temple is burning. Well, and of course the lightning coming down towards these raised hands. So, there are many details, but let's not spend too much time with one picture. I don't like to spend much time with one picture, but we always have a week in the year at least, you know. So, what is Karl König saying here? He's saying the mysteries of the past have burned down with Ephesus. And we stand on the other side of the water. And that is even geographically the case. At the time, Ephesus was at the coast. It's not any longer, it's pretty far inland, but it was on the coast. And the other coast that you looked towards was Europe. That was Asia Minor, is that the right word? Yeah, Asia Minor. It is already Asia. Whereas if you cross over, you're in Greece. So this is the step from the burning of the temple to the path of the individual. It is the beginning of the European epoch, which builds on the development of the individual. And that is all in one picture here. Let me read it again. And being now in senses heights, there flames into depths of soul, from worlds of spirit fire, the godly word of truth. With prescience seek in spirit grounds to find yourself in spirit kinship. This is the task of the individual today. The mysteries do not help us at all. The old mysteries don't help us. We have to stand there ourselves and receive this fire for the soul. An element that Rudolf Steiner spoke about many times later, this amazing verse he gave that probably most of you know, probably the last verse he gave to give fire to the soul. And possibly have it here, maybe not. I do, of course. One of the or maybe the last verse that Rudolf Steiner gave. And I believe it's the only verse which begins with I, meaning I, Rudolf Steiner. There are other verses that begin with I, but we can use that as a meditation, so to speak. Yes, I should do this and this. But here, it is, I think, very, as I say, autobiographical. That's a bit of a weak word, but it's Rudolf Steiner speaking to us. I want, with cosmic spirit, to infuse each human being, that a flame they may become, and fiery will unfold the essence of their being. You hear this verse? That is the 13th verse of the Calendar of the Soul. The other ones, they strive to take from cosmic waters what will extinguish flames and pour paralysis into all inner being. O joy, when human beings' flame is blazing, even when at rest. O bitter pain, when the human thing is put in bonds, when it wants to stir. Being now in senses heights, there flames into depths of soul, from worlds of spirit fire, the godly word of truth. This is, so to speak, so close to the innermost mission of Rudolf Steiner that he gives this verse on his deathbed, 1925. This is the meaning of this incarnation. This is what I also ask you to continue in my name. I think that is what we can understand from Rudolf Steiner there. Karl König spoke of the calendar of the soul in such a way that, as I did show you this little picture of that Rudolf Steiner made, the design for the calendar of the soul, this path of the stars. We are led on a path of the stars. And Karl König said, the calendar of the soul is a path which leads us through the realms of the stars, through the realms of the planets, to the realm where the etheric Christ lives. That was like a brazier, a looking back on all his work that he'd done, 33 years working on the kind of the soul, to realize it is this path which takes us to the stars, takes us there where our own I can unite with the I of the world. And then you will truly feel. For the Christ will in the surrounding circle hold sway, bestowing grace upon souls in the rhythms of worlds. And we hear exactly that in the path of the kind of the soul. That we are not in a position to do this just on our own. We have to connect to spirit beings that will bestow something upon us on our path. Can I widen my soul? Is the question then when we go to sum up. Can I do this? Because I do not have the power to take this gift that I'm seeking on my own. Out of myself, that does not work. It only comes because when I do this inner work, I will be granted this grace from the spirit world. It's not quite usual, we think as anthroposophists we need to do everything ourselves, But it's quite clear in the kind of the soul, it's quite clear actually in the foundation stone that it depends on this grace. It depends on bringing enough will into this path that grace can be bestowed on us. For the Christ will in the surrounding circle hold sway, bestowing grace upon souls in the rhythms of worlds. And you will find exactly this in the kind of the soul. And if you imagine in the situation leading up to the foundation stone, leading up to the Christmas foundation meeting, Rudolf Steiner living with this question, will the spirits allow this to happen? Can I actually, although karmically speaking, I'm not in the position to do this, can I, as initiate, take responsibility for the Anthroposophical society? And of course, he knew what difficulties would ensue. He knew what he was taking on. That was a big question of karma. And what is maybe not so very well known is the fact that in November of 1923, quite close actually to the foundation stone meeting itself, he still pondered founding a, now so the word brotherhood is always used, is that okay to use? Brother and sisterhood, is that okay? You all know what I mean? Yeah, because he was, so to speak, the center of the esoteric work. But now he would, in addition, be taking on the earthly karma of the Anthroposophical society, this terrible karma that was going to ensue afterwards also. He's taking responsibility for this. That is big for an initiate of his standing. So I think it is clear that he needs to ponder if he should maybe split the two. And we know the words, of course, that no, they're not split. It's one. The Anthroposophical society is there and an esoteric stream runs through it. That's a wonderful, I think the magnitude of what he says there only begin to feel on the background of this deep, deep question, am I allowed to take this karma on or not? And so he does. He becomes a leader in both the whole of the new Anthroposophical society. It becomes possible what was never possible before. And You know, I think, why was it such a big question? I think because Caspar Hauser was not there to do just that. If we take these two things we've heard about Caspar Hauser from Rudolf Steiner, on the one hand, he should have built a new Grail castle in the south of Germany and unfolded a new Grail culture as a political movement. He was not able to do this. Such a high initiate that Caspar Hauser certainly was, had that task and was prevented from doing it. And because of this, Rudolf Steiner was the first initiate to face this question of taking on earthly karma of the Anthroposophical society. And I think we can begin to feel the deep karmic connection between Rudolf Steiner and Caspar Hauser that was never really spoken out. Of course not. How should have Rudolf Steiner spoken about this, except in this one moment to Ernst Pfeiffer, if Caspar Hauser had not lived and died as he did, the connection between the human being and the cosmos would have been completely severed. That is big. But it was a different task than taking on earthly karma as a priestly king. From that he was prevented. But the second task he actually could fulfill. And Rudolf Steiner comes into the situation that this earthly karma is there and has to be taken on by him for the first time in human history, in Earth history. It's incredibly tragic, really, that Rudolf Steiner has to go through this. And of course, it was not long that he was allowed to live afterwards. But then we begin to have a feel of the importance of these words, that this task needs to be continued. Rudolf Steiner could not possibly fulfill this task completely. It can only be fulfilled if the karmic relationships on the earth are sorted out by human beings. It's not just if we are wonderful researchers or we understand so much about anthroposophy, but that we manage to sort out karmic situations. And remember what actually happened after the foundation stone lay. Rudolf Steiner, in these few months, basically, he was still on Earth. He gave 72 lectures on karma. It's almost impossible, but there they are. And Walter Johannes Stein, 1922, just before, 1922, he asked Rudolf Steiner, what is actually your main mission? And Rudolf Steiner answered quite quickly and quite simply, reincarnation and karma. But he was prevented from bringing this in 1902. People weren't interested. And so we find throughout the work of Rudolf Steiner here and there, a few lectures, very specific things. Some things were asked for. Then we have the lectures for the building workers at the Goetheanum. They wanted to know a little bit about this. And in the end, he has to bring this unbelievable wave of reincarnation and karma after the Christmas conference. And I think this is something of a magnitude we can only begin to understand as the real task of Rudolf Steiner. Because it means that social life, connections between human beings are healed. That is what it's about. The biggest task we can have on Earth is to develop what we so simply call love. which is the mission of our planet. It's nothing simple. It doesn't have to do with emotions, again, but it has to do with this very central task of our earthly existence. And to realize that, yes, the etheric being of the Christ is, according to Rudolf Steiner, of course, the Lord of Karma. There something begins to flow in 1924 that I think we haven't really grasped enough. What does that mean that he gives us all these lectures, all these indications, not just to study historic personalities, but to sort out social life? And so we have this picture, the 13th picture of the human being after Ephesus. We can also say after the fire of the Goetheanum, realizing it is on us to continue this work. Actually, not to have this temple behind us, but to realize it is in flames. And we need to look for the flames of our own existence. I want with cosmic spirit to infuse each human being, that a flame they may become, and fiery will unfold the essence of their being. That is, I think, an important description by Rudolf Steiner of his very own task. And so, of course, I cannot do otherwise than to look at the opposite verse now, right? We think of the 4 verses that belong together. I'm now taking the first verse of this cross. It is the 13th cross. It's the very last of this amazing metamorphosis. The 13th cross, the 13th picture. And then we come to a verse which I will read first before we look at the picture. It is verse 40. We are now exactly after Christmas. It is after St. John's, and now we were after Christmas. Yeah. So I will remind you of the 13th. And being now in senses heights, there flames into depths of soul, from worlds of spirit fire, the godly word of truth. Now we're here. And being now in spirit depths, there flows in the grounds of my soul, from the heart's world of love, filling the empty illusion of self, the word's fiery power. It is the fulfillment of this 13th cross. And I will show you this picture. Of course, we can ask, well, where is this fire, you know? Karl König drew a butterfly. Well, we can ask what significance this butterfly can have. It's, of course, the image for reincarnation, metamorphosis, most certainly. In between verse 13 and verse 40, we have this process of transformation, where thinking, feeling, and willing are transformed and formed into fruits for our earthly deeds, that love may prevail. Now, one other thing that belongs to this verse, I think, I put it down here. Karl König was definitely aware that Rudolf Steiner had given a verse with a butterfly. Now, I'm not sure if you all know this because it's only been recently translated in the complete works. So it's a book that's not in your library downstairs. I was looking for it today, but it's not there. So it's the fourth volume of the lectures and the collection of things about the esoteric school. And in this fourth volume, we hear about this verse, which was given in 1923. So exactly at this point of time. And he was asked for it. And who asked him? It was a group around Ita Wickman. It was particularly the esoteric group that Rudolf Steiner visited so often, and took Ita Wickman with him again and again, with Holze Hoditz and Lerchenfeld. It was a so-called Lerchenfeld group. And I think we can say, to a certain extent, the brotherhood that Rudolf Steiner could have formed would probably have been this group, or that would have been the center of this group. And the rest of the Anthroposophical Society would have been peeled off, so to speak. But no, that was not to be. And in the situation of 1923, when this question came up, this group asked Rudolf Steiner, what can we do to protect what you are doing? Because they must have realized the magnitude of this deed to take on the Anthroposophical Society. What can we do to protect what is happening? And there he gave a meditation of the butterfly. And you see, Karl König knew this, of course, and I'm certain that that is why, opposite to the fire of Ephesus, we actually have the butterfly. The way to protect what happened with the burning of the Goetheanum, with the foundation stone laying, the way to protect this is actually to transform our own soul, to live with this transforming forces that are pictured in the butterfly. And I would actually, I think I can finish with this because Karl König was very happy to come to America twice. He would have loved to come more than twice, but it was not given to him. And when he came to Spring Valley, and the first time he came, he could connect with Ernfried Pfeiffer, who was still alive then. He died in 1961. And Karl König came back in 1962. Ernfried Pfeiffer had died already. That was a deep connection for him. And Karl König was asked to give talks about movement and the word in Spring Valley. And we know from his diaries, he didn't know on his way across, he came by ferry in those days, in the ship, he was wondering, what should he say about movement and the word? And when he got to America, he could experience strongly that Rudolf Steiner was going to stand behind him. And so he gave these lectures, which are quite special. And at the end, he said the following: this is the garment of Christ. This is the garment of the one who has entered this earthly ground. Rudolf Steiner, in his foundation stone meditation, handed out to us the innermost sounding of the cosmic word, the substance of love. Light divine, Christ, Son. These are the word directed to the human being, spoken by the cosmic word itself. And to end the lecture, he said, I am permitted to say, Anthroposophia is as alive as on the first day. Only our hearts, our minds are dead to it. But Rudolf Steiner is with us.
I feel moved to say that I believe all of us experienced what we were given this evening as a bestowal of grace and as an awakening to the task that we carry on behalf of the social rebuilding of the Anthroposophical Society. The meeting of soul to soul, of eye to eye, that we cannot let be torn asunder. I feel that it would be good to just take a few moments of quiet so we each have a chance to really just let resound these words that were spoken this evening, and then we can get up and say thank you to Richard. So thank you for just leaving this moment of quiet. So may we all go forth on this path of heart knowledge, of love, into what we're called to do now. Thank you all, and thank you, Richard.
So dear friends, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, this presentation tonight. Thank you so much, Richard. This was so incredible to have you bring this to us. And I don't know if any of you have any questions, but if you would like to ask Richard something, please raise your hand and speak up. And if you're online, you can raise your electronic hand, and or you can type the question, and Paulette Arnold is on the computer and she can either speak them for you or unmic you. So if anyone would like to ask any question, please do.
I have a question about the butterfly, because I know Karl König gave a lecture to the co-workers about the butterfly. Is that the same meditation?
Yes. Yes.
Repeat the
There's a
question,
little-
please.
little booklet by Karl König, unfortunately not in your library downstairs, but called The Inner Path. And he discussed this with the co-workers in Camphill in the 1950s already. Exactly the same time when he was doing this Metamorphosis of the Cross, he also spoke about that. And that is why I'm pretty sure that that's what he meant with this picture. So from there, actually more the inner circle around Karl König used that quite frequently or continuously, probably.
I do remember the first time I read that, somewhere around 1998 or so. And how living that was.
It's not easy. Catch the butterfly, if you look for it. It's, I think that's the English, is it? Catch the butterfly?
Catch the butterfly, and it's in this set of lectures. There is a separate set of lectures of Karl König to
Oh, yeah.
co-workers. I can't remember what it's called.
The Inner Path by Karl König, this little booklet.
Is it the right?
But Carlo was speaking in 1998 in relation to the way that evil was working into the world in 1998. And Hagen Byzantz came over and they had a whole conference about it in Copenhagen. I said it wrong, Manfred Schmidt-Roland, excuse me.
Yes, he was here too.
Richard, can I ask about the, the people talk about the Platonists and the Aristotelians and, sort of these social divides between people. And now I just read that there's now also two more. There's somebody who's just put out a book about the Novalis stream and one other one. And I don't know, I just started to think about your four crosses on the calendar of the soul, like this might be the way they all come together.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is the task of anthroposophy today, is to bring together. And yeah, so thought needs to think things clearly so that one can bring them together. But I think the main thing is, and of course, we're all human beings. We're not just Aristotelians or Platonians or whatever. We are human beings, and that is the most difficult thing, isn't it? It's not necessarily what we believe in, or that isn't it really. It's purely this karmic connection of one to the other that obviously needs healing in our time. So I think apart from all these various, and of course it's not just two and not just four, but there's at least 12 streams we can look at in humanity. Of course they all need to play together, just like the 12, that is 13 groups of verses that need to sound together. And what better way to practice that than to experience the being of time of the earth in the circle of the weeks that we have with the calendar of the soul.
David.
Yeah, I want to thank you because there's something I've been thinking about, but it didn't click until your talk tonight. And you brought the whole question of rhythm, which is obviously the calendar of the soul. One of the more powerful themes you've brought that's gone through all the lectures. And then you talk about this event of Steiner entering an earthly society, but meant to be also a spiritual society. And it seems to me he gave the how of this very practically, so that anybody could understand it, but also experience it in the leading thoughts. His conception of the leading thoughts was that the Goetheanum, the core of the Goetheanum would be a sort of heart, sensing what was going on in the society, put out a leading thought, which people would be free to, which should disrupt their work, but they should, take it into their work and then give back this actual circulation of esoteric experience back to the Goetheanum, which then would keep this metamorphosis going, the conversation, this inward conversation, not an abstract conversation, but this inward pulsing in and out. And that needs, I think, somehow to be renewed, so that we are really one society, not an abstract thing with a bunch of, groups of people doing their own thing wherever, but there's no real living connection, no real spiritually living connection. Anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah, Karl König actually drew a little picture for one of his talks. We don't know for which one, but it was a picture of the heart and the flow of the seasons into the heart, out of the heart. This fourfold process that I spoke about in the first lecture, and he connected this to the being of the Goetheanum. What was behind that, we don't know, because the lecturers, unfortunately, hasn't been saved. But very definitely, he experienced that to be the task of the Vorstand. Not only the Vorstand, of course, but the whole of society, that this bloodstream would flow to and forth. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Richard, I think you touched very important sequence which is given in Foundation Stone in the middle panel. So practice spirit sensing, and then you will be truly feel. So just in continuation of our first conversation after your first lecture.
Yes.
So without practicing, feeling cannot be educated, as well as connection to spiritual world. So, but this is like whole group of exercises which is relates to spirit sensing, and of course you represented greatly work with calendar of soul. Can you mention something else like from this group of exercises which is relates to spirit sensing?
In the kind of the soul?
No, general, given by Steiner. So it's I feel it's like a pretty large group of exercises, including calendar. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting this question of the fourfold flow. And of course, there were originally for Rudolf Steiner it was 8 sections of the Goetheanum. That's what. Why not? You know, maybe it was just for outer reasons. But I think one place where you can find an answer to this is the way Rudolf Steiner describes the eightfold path in the book, The Knowledge of Higher Worlds. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right title. Good. If you look there, how he describes the path, the eightfold path in a new way, I think there is an answer there, and you'll see how almost the way he describes it for the teachers in 1919, you know, is keeping out of the will and keeping out of thinking and allowing true feeling to be cultivated. So you'll find that in the Eightfold Path too. It's a question: how do we come to the right? In German, he says das richtige Urteil, the correct judgment or correct discernment or whatever. But the steps before are to clear the space.
exactly, I think because uneducated feeling can be a big mess, right? So which is usually happening in the groups or whatever when people start to argue or driven by
Emotions, yes.
this kind of feelings, uneducated feelings.
Untransformed astrality.
Exactly.
You know, in the circus grounds in Britain, we always had these, we call them bumper cars. You know? And the point was to hit each other. That's what happens with astral bodies, in social life, isn't it? It's bumper cars. And I think that has to do with movement too. Yeah, that is in dire need of transformation, and that is very, very central. If you look at the knowledge of higher worlds, you will find a lot of indications towards that. And I think particularly the Eightfold Path. Yeah. Thank you.
Richard, we have one online question. Do they want to unmute and ask the question, Paulette?
Richard Halford.
Okay,
please
so-
unmute.
Okay, this is in regard to something that you said about to his,
Just a minute.
like-
You
We
should
can't
talk
hear
to the
you.
microphone.
can you hear me? I'm on,
Richard,
I'm
can
on,
you please unmute
He
and
is unmuted.
I am-
He's so
I am
quiet.
unmuted.
Screen.
Oh, I
I can't
wonder-
even hear it.
he might have to type it. I don't know. Let me
Um,
see. I'm not sure why that is.
I'm unmuted.
We can't hear you. Just hold
Okay,
on a
well,
minute.
then I can't say anything because I'm reading something that Steiner said. If you can't, as you can see in my picture, I'm unmuted. So maybe I'm not supposed to say this. So. Again, can you hear me?
A little bit.
Come on now.
Oh, I guess the people online can hear him.
Okay, so yeah, I apologize for the technical difficulties. We're not able to hear the question. For some reason, we cannot figure out how to get sound out of our monitor. So is it possible for you to type the question?
In the meantime,
Or he could email it to Richard.
in the meantime, maybe I say something to your question about feeling, because we do, of course, after Michaelmas, we have this wonderful redemption of thinking, feeling, and willing. And you'll see in the pictures also, Karl König has always gone from twofold before Michaelmas to threefold after Michaelmas. It's quite amazing. And the 29th verse, which is the verse that belongs to this week, to let the light of one's own thinking powerfully unfold within, and to discern the meaning of one's impressions. See, that is spirit sensing. From cosmic spirit's source of strength, it is spirit sensing. This is now my gift of summer, is autumn's rest, and also winter's hope. We got the question now?
No.
We're asking somebody else to type up the question because they can hear it.
Oh,
They can hear each other,
Yes.
but we almost can only just hear a tiny
Maybe the
bit.
sound is just down in your, if you look at the see the sound.
So I have a very elementary question, which is, do you have a recommendation on about which set of dates to use for the calendar of Soul with the changing of Easter? I know there's
Yes.
different
Yeah.
things that different people do.
We have a calendar on our website every year to help you with that, because of course Easter moves. Right?
Yes.
So that means that from Easter until St. John's, and from Easter backwards to Carnival, that is movable.
Hmm.
And everything else is fixed to dates. Right? So the biggest half of the year is fixed down to dates, from at least from St. John's Festival, which is the 24th. Right? Right through till Candlemas, those are fixed down. But after that, it is the movable Easter festival. 12 verses are movable. I think that's quite interesting. So it's important, really, for instance, if you're looking for your own birthday, right, to know when was Easter in that year, and then you can work out where is my birthday.
Yeah.
So that means that one has to adjust a little bit, but one can use it really very imaginatively. That is, and Rudolf Steiner also said, do what you want, basically. You know, I mean, he left everybody completely free. So don't worry, there's at least 3 verses that have the same Stimmung, mood. Right? So don't worry about it. But of course, there are also huge differences from one to the next. So let's do both. Yeah, be free and open with it, and at the same time be exact and take a look what happens if you count where Easter really is. And then it's a question, of course, Michaelmas, for instance, is a date. But if we are starting each verse on a Sunday, then perhaps you start Michaelmas 3-4 days before Michaelmas, which I don't do. So I put into our calendar on the website, just as a possibility, you know, to extend the verse before Michaelmas or shorten it, depending, and then to start the Michaelmas verse with Michaelmas Day. And sometimes that means you can hear this verse for 10 days. That's wonderful. And sometimes it's really condensed, you know. So I really have to get down to it, because 2 days' time is the next verse. So it all has its advantages and disadvantages. But I think it's good, you know, to move things a little bit. And for instance, where you have the feel that something belongs specifically to a date, like I say, for instance, Candlemas. I think there is a verse for Candlemas,
Yeah.
So I like to use that, right? Whereas it doesn't always fit exactly with the dates. So I move it a little bit, and that helps me to get to the right place by Easter. So there are the accounts you can find on our website.
And the Lazarus verse, right? The
Pardon?
Lazarus verse, right?
Yeah, for instance, yeah. So take it or leave it.
All right, Richard, so this
Yes.
question is about something Rudolf Steiner said about diabetes.
Oh,
In
dear.
a lecture to the workers in 1924, 6 months before insulin came out. But I don't exactly know what somebody is paraphrasing, so I don't exactly know what the question is. Does that trigger anything for you?
There's no question.
Yeah, and you know that diabetes is a problem in our time. I think we can take that up because it is a counter picture of the question how we find to our true I. Yeah. And apart from the whole question of diabetes, of course, the question of substances, let's say. The question how we connect to our own physical body, question of nourishment. Those are huge questions for our time that play a big role in the question how we find our true I. Substance misuse is obviously a path to lead us away from that. And if you remember that alcohol was an important invention in the history of mankind to prevent the ego from taking hold of the human being too early, before the human being was ready. It was to, what's the right word, dispel it a little bit, to hold back on the development, which was going much too fast. And of course, it's got much faster in our time. This is not something that's been finished, and therefore, also alcohol plays a huge role today, when its real task is long over. This was thousands of years ago that the human being had to invent something to prevent the ego from descending too quickly. And now in this time when the I of the human being does not relate to its true I, but rather to the bodily being, then it becomes an even greater problem with, for instance, alcohol, but also with other drugs too. So, and in that sense, I think, I'm not a doctor, so I can't really say too much about diabetes, but it certainly has to do with the connection of the I of the human being to his physical body, to his ether body. And this is something that needs to be resolved if the I is to unite with the true I. So it's an illness of our time.
And is there anything that we can do? Throughout this talk, you've talked about ways that we can support the mission of Rudolf Steiner and furthering the work that he brought. What about Caspar Hauser?
Yeah, one can of course dwell on the tragedy that Caspar Hauser was not able to fulfill his task. For instance, to build the Grail Castle and to reign as a priestly king in our times. That probably the threefold social order would have had a different basis, a different ground to seed into. The threefold social order was not possible because the ground was not prepared. And I think that has to do with that part of the mission of Caspar Hauser that was not fulfilled. And we can, of course, see the tragedy of it, and we can follow all sorts of questions that belong to that, who was responsible for it, what forces were at work. so on and so forth, and this is can be very fascinating. And I think that is also a problem of our time, that evil is really fascinating, also to anthroposophists. And I think sorry, I don't want to come too close to people, I don't want to tread on their feet too much, but nevertheless, I think it is a task for anthroposophy to overcome this staring at evil. Yes, we need to recognize evil, but we need to recognize it in ourselves, particularly, and not in everybody else. That is the danger, of course. So, what I want to say is, if we look at what Rudolf Steiner said about Caspar Hauser, we can realize that yes, he had a huge task as an initiate. And we can put the question, so if evil forces were looking for this child and actually incarcerated it, like a counter image of the three kings, so who were they expecting? They knew better than we do which child was going to be born, because they knew that this child that was born into Karlsruhe had to be taken. How did they know it? And what did they know? Because this question has not been answered, I think, fully by anthroposophical research until very recently. And there are many pointers there, there are many clues to this question. I'm going to take a shortcut and say, well, of course, it must have been a very high initiate to rebuild, so to speak, the Grail Castle in our time, not in the Middle Ages. So what would that have looked like? And what initiate could possibly have taken hold of political life of the 19th century? And just imagine what was all happening there. I mean, as I said, it's Napoleon, it's the founding of the United States, and the world is in a terrific process of metamorphosis. So there's so much going on. What personality or what spiritual individuality would have been in the position to take hold of that and be the center of a new priestly kingdom, which would be a world kingdom and not a German one. But the castle is in that side of Germany. That's beside the point. I think the point is it would have been a worldwide impulse that could have grown. Who could have been, or which individuality could possibly be seen in that connection? And I think there is only one answer to that, because it can surely only be Christian Rosenkreuz himself. And that is big, to imagine. As I say, I leave that as a question with you, of course, not as a result of necessarily, but if we imagine that Christian Rosenkreuz itself was to have taken this task that was then left to Rudolf Steiner, that is huge. That is really huge. And that was prevented. That is again a huge thing. Rudolf Steiner must have known that the preparation was not there. The historical preparation for the threefold social order, for instance, for karma, was not there. And the only individuality, I think, the only spiritual individuality we can think to that situation is this person who, in his past life as Saint-Germain, had visited the important ruling families of Europe. He had tried to send the French Revolution into the right direction, which failed. But he'd also spoken just exactly to the royalties connected with Caspar Hauser's family. He had many talks with Caspar Hauser's grandfather. And we do know that that area of southern Germany was predestined really to play a huge part in the creation of the German state, in the creation of a united Europe. And in the same sense also in the connection to world history. There were, of course, ties across the world from the families of the Duke of Bun to Sweden, Russia, America, all of it. And so this is not just a European thing, this is we call him the child of Europe, but the child of Europe is actually the child of the world. And so, on the one hand, of course, tragedy that this was prevented, but therefore the greater deed could be performed. That the connection between the human being and the spirit could be upheld. And therefore, we are in a position still to unite our own I to the world I. That's big.
Any other questions, Paulette? No.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Leon.
just wanted to remember Max Heindel. He went and spent, I think, a year studying with Steiner, founded a Rosicrucian Fellowship in America. He wrote the Rosicrucian Cosmic Conception, and in Oceanside in California, the little campus with a Rosicrucian temple in it.
Yes, there have been many attempts across the world to do things like that, and also to rebuild the first Goetheanum in Salzburg, for instance. Also now in the Czech Republic, there is an attempt to use the forms of the first Goetheanum. And yet, I think this task still lies very much ahead of us to create the forms of the Goetheanum in a social setting and not as architecture. We have the architecture of the calendar of the soul to work with as a path of practice. But these architectural forms need to become social forms. That is the significance. And we are, because Caspar Hauser could not build this kingdom, we are therefore free to do so.
All right, so thank you so much again for everything tonight. Please join us again tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. for the last of Richard's presentations here at Rudolf Steiner Branch. And the Zoom link is the same, and hopefully we will resolve the technical difficulty tonight in hearing questions. And I apologize for that once again, but thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.